Hi there, Andre from Peak Motorcycles here. It's a beautiful February day here in the Peak District. It's pretty cold still, but the snow is gone and the sun is shining and it's not blowing a gale. So I'm taking this Sunday morning opportunity to do the sound test on my Arrow exhaust. Now if you'd seen the sound test I'd already done on the stock exhaust and the MotoX, you'll know what this involves. I know it's not definitive, I know it's not the absolute, but it's a consistent way to compare multiple exhausts. So I'm just going to do exactly the same as what I've done before. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to let the bike idle and I'm going to take 3 sound measurements with the sound meter 1 meter back and 1 meter to the side at the same level as the rear of the exhaust. After that I'm going to do the 1 meter static test, which is where I bring the throttle up to 4,500 revs, measure the sound level, and I'm going to do that 3 times. 4,500 RPM is what the ACU recommend for doing this test on a bike that's between I think 250 and 500 cc's. The final test I'm going to do is the 2 meter max test, and this is where I move the sound meter back, so it's 2 meters back, 2 meters to the side, and I rev it to max and just see what the reading is. And again, I'm going to do that 3 times. And then when I've got all of that, I'm going to work out the averages of each one and give you a comparison back to stock and back to the MotoX. Now, some people might be wondering why this is important, and here in the UK there is a constant fight to keep the trails open and accessible for trail riders. They are shared with walkers and with horse riders, people walking dogs and cyclists. And anything that reinforces the case to ban motorcycles is a bad thing. So a lot of people are interested in how quiet they can make their motorcycle, even though that might sound like a slightly odd thing to be doing. I know there's a lot of exhausts out there stamped for race use only, like the Yoshimura, which is a fine piece of engineering. Sounds great, but if you're using that on the trails over here, you're only reinforcing the case to have those shut down. The Arrow exhaust I have on here is the Honda Titanium, and that has both a baffle in it and also a catalytic converter, and it is homologated for road use. So it's fully road legal exhaust here in the UK and across Europe. I think it's the only fully road legal one I've found. I know that there are some others, but I don't believe they've gone through the homologation process, and they wouldn't meet the emissions requirements either. Emissions aren't actually something that's checked as part of the checks you do on motorcycles here, so I think if you have an exhaust that's quiet enough, even though it doesn't have a catalytic converter, I guess that's probably fine. If you get stopped and somebody really wants to make an example of you, maybe they would pick you up on that. But, you know, always on the hunt for quiet exhausts. If it can be fully road legal and have a catalytic converter, then even better. So here we go. So the first test I'm going to do is the idle test. So this is 3 measurements at idle, and then I'll take the average of the 3. Here we go. So the sound of the countryside is around 40 decibels. With me talking quietly, it's about 50 decibels. Okay, so here we go, idle test number 1. So there we go, I've taken 3 measurements and I've got 72.1, 71.7 and 72.6 decibels. It has actually been getting slightly quieter as I've been taking the readings, and I think that's just because I thought the engine was warm, but when I turned it off to do the intro, I guess it cooled down a bit. So yeah, 72.1, 71.7 and 72.6. So that's it. So that's the idle test done, and the 3 numbers I have are 72.1 decibels, 71.7 and 72.6, which across the 3 of them is an average of 72.1 decibels, which is actually exactly the same as the stock exhaust. It is slightly louder than the MotoX exhaust, but the MotoX exhaust is just very quiet on idle. It does get noisier later on. So now I'm going to go and do the idle test. So this will be doing, again, 3 measurements, bringing it up to 4,500 RPM and seeing what the 3 measurements are. Here we go. For the static test for the Arrow Thunder Titanium exhaust, I have 2 measurements, 82.2 decibels and one 81.9, making an average of 82.1 decibels. Just to give you an idea, to compare that back, 82.1 decibels, stock is 83.4 decibels, so it is quieter than stock, and MotoX is 80.1. So at 4,500 RPM, it is quieter than the stock exhaust, and again, slightly noisier than the MotoX exhaust. So final test is the 2 meter max test, so maybe this will be where the real difference comes in. for the 2 metre max test, I'm going to move the sound meter back, so it's 2 metres back, 2 metres to the side. I think it's actually in a slightly different place. It's from where the rear wheel touches the ground, not from directly below the exhaust. And it's going to be at 1 metre 35 high. Here we go. Okay, so that's the 2 metres back, 2 metres to the side. I just need to lift it up now to be 1.35 off the ground. Okay, so here we go for the 2 metre max test. So I took 2 measurements at 99.3, 1 measurement at 99.5 decibels. So the average of the 3 is about 99.35, something like that, not quite 99.4. So where does this leave us? So it is louder than stock, it is louder than the MotoX, and it's quieter than the MotoX with the baffles out. So what does that mean? It means that the Arrow exhaust is about the same as stock at idle, slightly quieter than stock at 4,500 RPM and slightly louder at 10,500 RPM. So it's not the quietest exhaust. The stock exhaust is still the quietest at full throttle. Having said that, I was out trail riding on the bike yesterday, and in the usable range, which I guess is probably up to around about 7,000 RPM for me most of the time, it did really feel quiet. It does have a different sound to the stock exhaust, and my friend who I was riding with, he didn't notice it being particularly loud. I passed several groups of horses on the road and again didn't cause any disturbance to the animals. So I am going to stick with it. I do think that it's the best and probably the only road legal exhaust you can get if you want to stay quiet, if you want to save a lot of weight, and if you want to, keep control of the emissions that your bike is making, then I think it's the best one there is. I bought this exhaust with my own money. Cost an awful lot, unfortunately. So nobody's paying me to say this, but I think of all the ones I've tried, this is certainly my favoured one so far. I'm going to try and get hold of one of the Black Widow exhausts. They do a 400mm one, which I think is their quietest. So I'm going to do one more test like this with that exhaust, just out of curiosity really. I don't think that exhaust comes with a catalytic converter, but it is road legal according to them, so I think it's certainly going to be quiet. So anyway, I hope this has been interesting and useful, and if it has, maybe I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.